There's a rather long Sufi allegory. Let's see if we can follow its thread, its metaphors and its symbols, to allow us to answer this question that's been posed. Where is it? What is this place in which we find ourselves when the bird of our mind no longer has any roost on which to rest? The allegory is about a man called Saiful Muluk. Now, Saiful Muluk had spent half his life seeking after truth. He traveled to many, many teachers. He'd read the books, he'd practiced the disciplines, and he continued on his quest. And in his questing, he heard about a great Sufi mystic by the name of Ansari. Now, Ansari was also a great Sufi poet, as you might already know. So Saiful Muluk made his way to the abode of Ansari. But to his very great surprise, when he arrived there, on the gate of Ansari's house was a sign saying, "Wisdom sold here." Now, in all his travels, Saiful Muluk had never had to part with any money for the knowledge and the wisdom of the teachers that he'd come across. So he was very greatly surprised. But he entered the gate, and there was the ancient mystic Ansari sitting under a tree writing a piece of poetry. And Ansari looked up at Saiful Muluk and said, "Oh, have you come to buy some wisdom?" And Saiful Muluk was taken aback by this. And he said to him, he challenged Ansari, he said, "Well, in all of my travels I've never had to pay for any wisdom. Why are you charging me?" And Ansari waffled on about something. "You know, I have to give baraka and one has to keep one's body and soul together, so forth, but do you want knowledge or not? How much money have you got?" So Saiful Muluk handed over all the money that he had, which was about 20 pieces of silver, and Ansari said, "Well, for this I can give you 3 pieces of advice." So Saiful Muluk listened, and Ansari said, "The first is, a small cloud of dust means danger." Saiful Muluk thought to himself, "That's not a piece of wisdom," and he said so. He said, "This is not ancient knowledge." Ansari answered, "Knowledge is no good to a man who is dead." So Saiful Muluk kept his peace and listened to what Ansari had to say. And then Ansari said, "If you find a bird, a cat, and a dog together, take them and take care of them." Now, this was a little bit more philosophical, so to speak, to Saiful Muluk, but he kept his counsel and waited for the 3rd piece of advice. And the 3rd piece of advice that Ansari gave him was, if and when the first 2 pieces of advice are fulfilled, a door will appear. Enter it. Well, Saiful Muluk, of course, in the way of all seekers, was intrigued by Ansari, even though this illusion about him not being what he anticipated him to be. So he wanted to stay there with him. but very peremptorily and rather rudely, and Sari sent him packing on his way. So in the way of the seekers after truth, the pattern already set, Saiful Moluk set off again to find more teachers. And he did. He found several more teachers before one day he found himself in a marketplace, and there was a sale going on, and he'd arrived there just at a moment when a bird, a cat and a dog had been sold. And as he saw the man who had bought them walking off down the road, Saiful Moluk beat himself, saying, I've missed my opportunity, but scratching his head he said, but to himself, but I haven't seen the cloud of dust yet that he speaks of danger. But then that evening, when he'd settled down in a little caravanserai for the night, he was looking up the notes that he'd read from previous masters that he'd been with, and in those notes it intimated and implied that things were not really sequential in the times that they might be said. So of course Saiful Moluk had a thought about it, and he had the other thought. He said the piece of advice was not to buy a bird, a cat and a dog, but just when he found them together that he should take care of them. So the very next day when he got up, he went off and he found where it was that the man who'd bought the bird, the cat and the dog lived, and he found that this man had only bought these creatures because he had taken pity of them, but he didn't really want them, and he was very, very happy to release them to Saiful Moluk when he inquired. So Saiful Moluk took the bird, the cat, and the dog, and he kind of settled in that place, and he learned the ways of being a spinner. And as a spinner, he was able to make enough money to feed himself and his 3 animals. And this went on for some time, and he even became a little bit revered in the town. He was a respected worker, took care of his animals well. But then one day, as he was walking back to his house, he saw a little cloud of dust in the distance. And suddenly, the advice of Ansari came back to him. A cloud of dust bespeaks danger. So immediately he went back to his house, gathered up his animals, and went down the road. So before very long he found himself in another place, and several days later he learned that that cloud of dust had been a marauding army who had annihilated the whole town in which he'd been living. But Saiful Moluk found himself in a place where not only did they not have any need for spinners, but they didn't like animals. So he became a pariah, an outcast. He lived under trees and around in the forest. He couldn't even find a place to live. His stomach growled. But in that state of extreme need and tension, as his belly was rumbling and his concerns were the responsibility of his animals, he had a vision. He had a vision of a golden ring hidden in the crevice of a piece of log down by a river that he could clearly see in his mind's eye. Now, the next day, when dawn came up, forgetting about his growling belly, he went off knowing somewhere deep inside of himself that this place was real. And so there it was, the river, the tree, the logs. And when he looked, sure enough, lodged in the piece of wood was this golden ring. And he took out the ring. And as he was holding it, a great booming voice somewhere, here, there, spoke to him and said, I am the power, the wisdom, the knowledge of the great King Solomon, blessed be his memory. Ask me for anything and I will give it to you. So immediately, Saiful-Muluk asked for food for his animals. And it was given. It appeared before him. And after they were replete, Saiful-Muluk had a thought to ask this great being, if it was a being, a genie, he said, is it the end times? The voice said, no, it is not the end times. But you know, from that day on, Saiful-Muluk was quite content because all his needs somehow were provided. He had a little house built by the river. He was able to feed his animals. And in the time there, people started to come. They even began to call him Saif Baba, teacher. And then learned pundits would come. And they would attempt to engage Saiful-Muluk in debate. But you know, Saiful-Muluk would not get into debate with them. All Saiful-Muluk wanted to do was to relate his experiences with his great teacher Ansari and tell the story about what had happened. But then one day a very strange thing happened. The bird spoke to him, his bird, because you know, over those years, with not needing to go out to seek a livelihood, to not engaging himself in debate, to not reading the books, he was able to study his animals. He learned their ways intimately, and in his own way, he guided them in what he thought was the right path. But the bird spoke to him and said, you know, the end times has been with you many times, but you've missed the opportunity. What do you mean? Said Saiful-Muluk. I've always been true to myself, to my purpose, to my reason. And then, of course, the cat and the dog piped in also and said, yes, you have come a ways of understanding because you can now understand what it is that we're saying. But what you have not realized is that we are all one, that your holding on to your purpose has been your greatest deterrent. Now, about that time, another pundit came by and settled himself under a tree near Saiful-Muluk's house, and he befriended the animals. And as was usual, Saiful-Muluk went out to give courtesies and to again recount his own experiences about how Ansari had given him his purpose, take care of these animals, and so forth. And this dervish said, I don't want to listen to this rubbish. I understand what you're saying, but I know what you should be saying. And then the dervish said a strange thing. He said, as sure as my name is Khwazan. Now, Khwazan means door. And suddenly, Saiful-Mulk had some gleaming of an understanding. But he said, I don't understand. My master gave me my purpose. The dervish was, don't speak to me about this. Don't speak to me about this rubbish. Saiful-Mulk became a little bit chastened and a little bit humble. And he said, please, then tell me, what is it that I must do? The dervish said, give me your animals. Immediately, Saiful-Mulk said, but my animals, I don't know you. I don't know. Go, said the dervish. But he himself went. The next day, Khwazan was gone from under the tree. It was 3 years. 3 years when Saiful-Mulk continued laboring over this, until one day he woke up. He went to his bird, his cat and his dog, and he said, you are free. I am no longer responsible for you. In that instant, his bird, his cat, his dog appeared before him, as did Khwazan and all the pundits who had visited his door in those years and merged into the great poet Ansari before his eyes. Ansari opened a door in the tree under which the dervish had sat. And Saiful-Mulk walked through into that place where all questions are answered, all things are evident, and stillness, emptiness abides. An allegory. An allegory. What is this place? Where are we when our mind can no longer find a place on which to rest, a truth, a reason for being, a purpose, a quest? In other words, movement. has it ceased in you? Are you still bound by the movement of your mind? I need this, I need that. What if? I cannot tell you how many times over these last days, these last few days, phone calls and visits have been the same thing. Yes, but what if? If only. Drop it! Whatever it is that your mind is trying to rest on, whether it be an immediate need or some quest or some reason for existence, drop it! That's your doorway.